Hey YouTube, Kevin Cleary with a knife video. I've got another new CRKT. This one is the Hootenanny. It's been out for a little while. I noticed there's still not a lot of YouTube videos out there about this one, so I thought I'd get one up. And the other thing is, kind of explain to you how I ended up getting this knife, because it wasn't on my list initially. I wasn't, back when I did the most anticipated knives of 2015, this one wasn't really high on my list. But what happened is we went on vacation a while back and we were in Daytona, Florida, and I walked into a store called the Florida Gun Exchange. Cool store, and actually I did get to look around at everything. They have really good prices. Obviously, being from out of country, I wasn't going to buy a gun there, but probably wouldn't be a bad idea. I noticed they did have fairly competitive pricing, and I noticed they had a big knife section. So I started looking at the knives. I guess not big, sort of one glass case with some knives in it. And so I started looking at the knives, and they had some pretty nice stuff. They had some ZTs, and they had some Microtechs, and pretty cool blades. Anyway, so I'm looking around, and the guy there, I told him, I don't know if I'll buy anything, but could you show me a couple things? And he said, sure. So he's pulling a bunch of stuff out, and he took a lot of time with me. And I've got to say, even though when you're not going to make a big sale, it shows some class to go ahead and take that time with a customer who, legally I was not going to be able to buy a gun there. So. Pretty cool guys. Anyway, now eventually I picked up this knife, and I'll just tell you for interest's sake, while I was there I picked up a couple zero tolerances, a 0900, a 0801, picked up a couple Microtechs, Benchmade OTFs, Microtech OTFs. Finally, SOG Snarl, which I didn't like the way it felt in hand. Finally I picked up this, and I guess not finally, I picked this up and looked at it for a while and looked at some others and kind of came back to this and ended up buying it. Once I got it in hand, I was really, really impressed. Okay, on that initial sort of impact, what was it? The feel in hand, of course, was really cool. I liked the front choil. This ability to choke up and do some really fine work was impressive to me. The thinness and just the overall design. The bolsters are kind of a cool touch. The finish on the GRN is sort of trying to copy carbon fiber. It's not so close that it feels like a cheap knockoff, but it's close enough that it gives it a nice looking sort of finish. All right. There are a couple things that I'm sort of like, okay, whatever. The oversized pivot, kind of decorative. That's, I think it would have been better without it. The lines here in the bolster, they're fine, but, so there are a couple things that aren't, the end all be all. But after I played with it and flicked it out a few times, I realized, hey, this is actually a pretty good blade. So I went ahead and bought it. The centering, by the way, is not perfect, and I looked at it in store and knew that, but went ahead and picked it up anyway. Now, that's how I ended up with this knife. I should tell you, it's a Ken Onion design, and actually, I like some of the stuff Ken Onion's been doing with CRKT. I don't own a lot of that stuff, but I kind of like it. Anyway, that's how I ended up with it, and I think it's actually a pretty. I can imagine this knife doing pretty well for CRKT. Although I will say this one thing about it: I don't like the name. The name is Hootenanny, and that's sort of a party, right? And I don't know. Does this knife say party to you? I'm not sure where the name kind of fits in or how it connects. So that's totally besides the point. But they could have called it the CRKT number 15 folding knife and whatever. Anyway, so let's carry on and get into size and weight, because size and weight is actually pretty good on this. CRKT markets it as an EDC blade, and hey, I think it's pretty good. It's right in there. 8 inches overall, and it's in fact just under 8 inches, but so close that it's not worth saying 7 and 15.5 sixteenths or something stupid like that. It's basically 8 inches. 3 3/8 inch blade, 4.5 inch handle, and that's where you see how it's just under. So it's actually just over 4.5 inches, just over 3 3/8. Okay, now those numbers are good. It's also quite thin. The weight on this is 4.8 ounces, so it's under 5 ounces. Now for the size, are there lighter knives out there? Yes, there are, but it's totally acceptable. Okay. By the way, consider that you've got a fair bit of stainless steel here, so that's going to add weight. This is essentially a frame lock. It's The steel is thinner than what you normally find on a frame lock, but basically functionality is a frame lock. And so stainless steel frame locks are notoriously heavy, right? So so they've actually done pretty well keeping it under 5 ounces at 8 inches. So nothing to really complain about there. Let's talk about the blade. The blade is one of the things that really sold me on this knife. And there's a couple of reasons. One, of course, it's almost 3.5 inches, which is kind of a magic number for me. The cutting edge is quite long for the blade length. You got pretty well 3 3/8 inches, even though the blade length is 3 3 inches. So it's like a 1-to-1 ratio, which I like. The upswept, you know, the sort of upswept shape, it is a drop point, but it's sort of like an upswept drop point where, you know, if you continued the blade up here, you'd end up with almost like a scimitar shape or something. So it's pretty cool. Very functional, by the way. I've used this for all kinds of things. And of course, you guys know that I like deep hollow grind, and this is a very high hollow grind, and it's a very, very good edge geometry, nice and thin here, and I love that. Okay, I don't know that I'd go so far as to say I prefer a hollow grind over a flat grind, you know, a full flat grind, but I definitely really like high hollow grinds. Really, really nice. In addition to that, it's got this cool finger choil with really functional jimping, and this sort of, on the mid spine here, there's another row of jimping, and it's really nice. When you hold the knife in this grip, you just got so much control. It feels really, really good in hand. Let me, before I move on, zoom in on this so that you can see that blade in close up, see some of those details I referred to, and then we'll go on with some of the other features. So there you go, you can see that nice hollow grind there. CRKT on this side, Hootenanny on this side. You can see the little IKBS symbol, which I'll speak to in a minute when we get to deployment. But yeah, there's that blade. Very nice edge geometry, nice deep hollow grind there. The blade steel, by the way, I haven't even mentioned the blade steel. That's always the one thing everyone asks. The blade steel is HCR13 MOV. So, you know, nothing to write home about, but certainly it's going to do its job. You know, don't expect to go a month without sharpening it, but it'll certainly get you through a few days before you need to resharpen it. And even then, if you strop your knives regularly, it can go even longer. Okay, so that's the blade. Let's talk about lockup and deployment, because this is a kind of a deceiving knife. It looks like a liner lock, because, you know, you've got these FRN, what are kind of inserts essentially, but the reality is the functioning of this knife and the way the cutout is up here, it's really just a stainless steel frame lock. Okay, the liners there are not really adding any structure. Now there is one drawback to that, and that is you've got a pretty thin lock here. So there's not a lot of steel, and so that may create a bit of a weaker lockup. I wouldn't put this, you know, I'm not going to send this knife to Cold Steel and have them put it up against, you know, one of their blades in those great Atom Demco tests that are so fun to watch. But it's going to be more than strong enough for any EDC task. Lockup, as you can see, is fairly late on this. And it was late in store. It hasn't moved. And the reason I'm not that concerned about that is because in stainless steel, you've got steel on steel. There's not going to be a lot more wear. You know, this is pretty much where the thing's going to stay forever. So a little bit late lockup is not a big deal at all. And I'd say it's at about 75, maybe 80% there. Okay. Deployment is via flipper, and I really like this flipper. It's small but functional, and I really like that. You know, I think if I did have a complaint about the 0560, you know, it's one of my all-time favorite knives, but if I did have a complaint, it would be the flipper is kind of this big hook sticking out the back of the knife. Couldn't you do something a little more, you know, understated with that? And I think the Hootenanny has done a pretty good job of getting a good functioning flipper without it being this giant thing sticking out in your face. So good there. By the way, it came very sharp, and I have touched it up a couple times, and it stayed sharp really well. So yeah, flipper is good and fast. Lockup is very positive, and of course a little late, as I said. Now the other thing that I wanted to mention here is the IKBS. So it's on bearings, and for an EDC blade, and really for a blade at this price point, which is like $45 or something, you don't really expect to see a ball bearing pivot. You really don't. The fact that this has one, you know, if you just love ball bearing pivots, hey, maybe that's a selling feature for you. I kind of feel like I could take it or leave it. And the reason I could leave it is because I feel like there's the potential for failure there. You know, it's sort of like when people, you know how your grandfather used to say to you, all those electronic bells and whistles on your car, they're just more things to go wrong. Okay, well, in some ways, you know, a folding knife is kind of a simple tool. So you get a ball bearing pivot system and you're definitely complicating the issue. All right, I'm going to give you an example. My EDC today is the eraser. This is one of my all-time favorite CRKTs. If someone said, hey, which CRKT should I buy? You know, there's a few that I think are really good if it's just going to be one knife, but if you go, hey, I've got a few other blades and I just wanted one CRKT, I would probably say the eraser. You know, I don't know that this is the perfect one blade for all things type of knife, but man, this is a cool blade. You know, you've got this big blade, flips really, really well as long as you button it rather than light switch. It doesn't light switch that well. I'll see if I can demonstrate. Yeah, that was a light switch. But if you push button this, it just flies out every time. Guess what? Flips really well. Really one of my smoothest knives. This has no ball bearing pivot. It's just washers. And they've done a really good job. So if you can do it on this, you know, why not do it on this? And I think the answer is this. I'm going to, you know, go a little negative here just for a second, but this is a major trend. I think you can get away with looser tolerances and still end up with a knife that flips well by going with a ball bearing pivot. So I actually think it may be a cost saving feature rather than a cost adding feature. I just kind of have the suspicion that you know, you can kind of be not perfect and still get away with a knife that flips well and functions really smoothly by having those pivots in there, the ball bearing pivot in there. Okay, so that's my kind of suspicion about that. I could be totally wrong, but I just kind of wonder if that's why we're starting to see these on cheaper and cheaper blades. Now, let's go on to the handle. The handle, again, is another win. I like the texturing on these FRN inserts or scales. They're not really scales like you'd see on a liner lock. They're more like inserts or covers. They're really nice, just enough grippiness to keep it there. By the way, the jimping on this knife is phenomenal. You know, how many knives, even really expensive knives, have I said, and have you heard others say on YouTube, hey, the jimping sucks? It's great when you pick up a very budget-friendly knife and the jimping is really, really well done, and it really is. So jimping is a win. The handle shape overall is a win. Notice I've got enough real estate. You guys have heard me complain about that before. I hate when I try to hold a knife in hand and I can't. So yeah, big win there. It is all Torx bit construction. So again, that's nice. If you ever need to take this thing apart, it's no big deal. The only downside you might find on this handle is the single position pocket clip. So if you're a lefty or if you only prefer tip down carry, which I don't know why you would, as long as you don't work for Benchmade, you'll want it to be, you know, tip up carry. Anyway, the pocket clip then is the only possible issue that some people might have, but I actually, of course, that's how I want to carry it, so it works for me. Overall, let me back out here so I can, there we go. Overall, I think this is a great blade. Real win on CRKT's part. Very budget friendly, very well put together, at least my example is. No major issues. As I said, the lockup is later than I'd like, but otherwise, yeah, great blade. I've actually used this quite a lot. I love the blade shape. I love how comfortable it is in hand. And it's great for those days where I want something that isn't too high end, that, you know, if I lose it or drop it or whatever, no big deal. So all I can say about this is, yeah, really good blade. If you're looking for a CRKT to buy in 2015, I think this is the one to go with. And we'll talk to you soon.